Hey guys, welcome back. We are headed to Warhammer Quest again, 1995 release version. We are looking at the Imperial Noble. Now, the Imperial Noble, unless I'm mistaken, I'm going to start coming in with a little bit of just Blood Angels Red plus Gryphhound Orange. This I will put over his jerkin as well as most of his trousers. Yeah, so this model, this expansion for Warhammer Quest was released very soon after 1995, as far as I recall. He was, I think, one of the first of the expansion packs to come out, and he was, absolutely created a stir when it landed because it is a beautiful model. But as a result, I believe his rules are a little bit lacking. I think, generally speaking, over time, um, the rules writers got more and more generous with Warhammer Quest as far as the hero abilities and powers are concerned. And generally speaking, the powers, well, the heroes got better and better as time went on. So this guy being released so early on, I think saw him get a little bit of the short end of the stick. This guy and the warrior priest, I think, are a little bit dubious as far as damage output is concerned. But absolutely no difference, to anyone who's willing to do even a rudimentary little bit of house ruling and rules revision. And as a community, the Warhammer Quest uh, 95 community has really come together to put together some sterling updates to rules that were a little bit lackluster at the time. But yeah, this guy was very quickly added on to Warhammer Quest because he really was there to add a bit of diversity to the party insofar as having the glass cannon archetype, which was notably missing. Oddly enough, the elf was actually quite resilient because of all that elf armor and elf shields, elf helms, and so on and so forth. So the elf was more like a dodge tank. He could take quite a bit of punishment despite being a fragile little elf, and he was really useful to have in the party for his healing ability. This guy, I guess, if I were to use just traditional RPG kind of archetypes, this guy is more of a DPS character, which is a weird thing to say because he had a really strange way of engaging with the enemy. So the weapon that he's holding here is one of two that he could obtain during the game, but I believe this is supposed to represent the one that he starts with, which is his rapier. And the rapier was a bizarre weapon insofar as it could basically inflict as many hits as you wanted. So long as you continued to keep rolling hits, he could continue to keep attacking. The trade off, however, is that it was all at a very lackluster strength of 2, which is fine initially when you're sort of fighting mountains of orcs, fighting things like goblins and goblin archers, skeletons, all these like minor opponents. But as soon as you got something particularly tough or effective, then really all you had was your pistol to fall back upon. And it's a pistol like any other in the game insofar as it needs to be reloaded at point blank range. The dueling pistol does actually quite a lot of damage at strength 6, but essentially he is reduced to just the one attack. Plus, he needs to actually be quite close to the enemy to do the maximum amount of damage. But the funny thing is, um, he cannot be so close as to be like adjacent to an enemy. He has to be just close enough to discharge his pistol without being in base contact, so one square distant, which is where he will let his shot at strength 6. So yeah, kind of situational. If enemies appear, they tend to appear in base contact anyway. So this guy is stuck to relying on his not very impressive rapier, which is a bit unfortunate. Um, yeah, he's an interesting one. Now, the quality of life for this guy does go up dramatically as he levels up. And the reason why I say this is because there is one ability that he can get, which basically lets him strike um, with his rapier at his own strength rather than the strength of 2, which is the rapier strength. And that basically turns him into a horrendous death dealing machine, because suddenly this guy, with his quite impressive weapon skill, all things considered, suddenly is doing as many attacks as he likes, so long as he continues to hit, but all at a much more reasonable strength of 3 if he's at low battle level, and 4 if it's at higher battle level. And what this also allows him to do, because he is no longer reliant on using his weapon's strength as the damage um, added to a d6, of course, he now has the ability to basically add his strength to it, which means that he can augment it as well using various items. So suddenly, this guy goes from being one of the weakest guys in the party, damage output wise, basically killing monsters by a death of 1,000 cuts. And basically, he has nothing to do if he can't roll a hit to save his life, to basically dishing out a massive number of relatively decent attacks and being able to stab his opponents into paste, which is great. Unless, of course, you are one of the other players who, you spend all your time waiting for this guy to finish his attacks. Because once he gets like 3 attacks, 2 to 3 attacks, suddenly this guy is rolling dice after dice after dice after dice after dice. And with particularly tough opponents, it can be a case of really, swing and do nothing, swing and do nothing, and swing and do nothing, or swing and do one wound, swing and do 2 wounds, swing and do 1 wound. So it really took a really long time to resolve all of his attacks. Despite all this, however, I still love this model because I really like the way he's designed. He immediately puts me in the mind of Ramirez from Highlander. It's such a cool pose. You can really see the disdain in his expression, and just the way he's got his sword over his shoulder is kind of neat. The other thing I really like about the model is, even though this is, in my opinion, meant to represent the dueling sort of rapier starting equipment, it kind of can pass for a saber as well, which is the second weapon that he eventually gets when he levels up a couple of times. More than likely, he's going to end up getting the dueling saber as well. So that weapon allows him to basically parry attacks coming in and strikes at a more reasonable strength of, whatever his strength is really. It's just that he doesn't get the repeated attacks. So this guy, kind of cool, great miniature, rules not so good, but that's hardly a problem for anyone who's part of a relatively enterprising gaming group, or else has access to materials, because this model's rules have been adjusted over time by the community, and right now he is a pretty viable replacement for, say, the barbarian, in case you need a model to make use of all those wonderful magical swords. And to be fair, looking at the loot, magical swords are a fair proportion. Quite a lot of magical swords are finesse type weapons, or else they do like tremendous damage if allowed to sneak past the enemy's guard, or with 1 or 2 augmentation kind of spells or potions. The Imperial Noble can become quite an impressive character in his own right. And with how good the miniature is, I can't see why you wouldn't want to add him to your party. He really is quite a standout figure, who also came with a very fetching color scheme. So this guy's outfit is blazing red, and he's almost got a bit of a conquistador kind of look, because he was painted with very dark hair. That honestly though, that Ramirez kind of reference, I think he's clearly Ramirez, right? Somebody really loved Sean Connery, and that movie came out in '86, right? So there's a very good chance that somebody watched it by the time you get to '95. So yeah, and you know what? I'm perfectly okay with it, because this is an example of an homage done well, because this model is is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And if you don't get it, you still find that it's a nice miniature. Cool. So I'm going to jump in and detail some of the red or the yellow areas. I mean, and this is just going to be Iyanden yellow, and I'm just going to put this on the trim of his cloak. This model, the original color scheme for this model, it's got some quirks, but it's actually a really nice color scheme insofar as it makes very clever use of the margins to kind of draw your eye to detailed areas. He's got that classic pairing of a really warm red outfit with essentially a dark green kind of cloak. So that perfect combination of a cool dark green to offset all the warmth emanating from his main gear, his doublet, as well as his hose. So he really pops beautifully well. Like somebody with a strong grasp of color theory clearly chose the colors for this miniature, and he was just a real favorite of my gaming group at the time. Unfortunately, we couldn't get quite his abilities to work, but you know, that's how it is, really. I mean, sometimes models have shortcomings to work around, and my gaming group basically eventually found a way to do it, even though we were very young at the time. We were all just school kids. Yeah, but the Imperial Noble was a real favorite because of just all the role playing opportunities that you would get, because it was really fun to sort of like. I remember my friends my friend who was piloting the Imperial Noble. Every time he fired his pistol, he would cock his thumb and yell bang, which was great. I mean, it's little things like this that really, sort of live on in your memories years after the fact, and glorious, absolutely glorious. So yeah, these slits in his hose on his pants, on his lederhosen, are oddly enough yellow. I have no idea why this is the case. The slits on his shirt are in fact black, and I wonder whether this was a color scheme choice or it was just, really to represent the fact that he's got quite esoteric tastes. Um, it's not quite what you would expect. I would have expected all of it to be yellow, all of it to be black, because, or maybe that's too matchy for an Imperial Noble. I have no idea, but nevertheless, we're going to stick with it. I think some of these areas we're going to need to come in to try to define the interior a little bit more, but that's just how it is when you paint these slashes. Gotta take your time, don't rush it, and it will look fine when you finally get around to touching it up beautifully. Cool. So that's it for his face. Well, that's it for his collar, really. Yeah, maybe it's time to jump in with a little bit of orc flesh. Orc flesh is actually the perfect color to do his cloak, as well as this giant cowl that he's got going. Why is it a cowl? No, it's just a really flamboyant collar, I suppose, with gigantic flat lapels that are just so big that they happen to look like a cowl, which is why I kind of jumped down that avenue. But yeah, really great model. Lots of hair, and it's the little goatee, right? It's the little goatee as well as the black hair, plus the choice of weapon and so on and so forth, that really makes this guy stand out as Ramirez to me. Beautiful model. So I'm dropping in the orc flesh onto his cape. I guess it's more of a cape than a cloak, isn't it? Because it's fairly short and it looks like a gentleman's garment. Yeah, there are a lot of clever choices on this miniature. Everything that he wears looks expensive. Everything looks like it's sort of custom tailored for him. There are no hand-me-downs on this model. No furs belonging to the barbarian's grandmother or something that he then wears into battle, because it uniquely doesn't fall apart when stabbed at by enemies. This guy is all fashion, all Gucci. He's really quite an endearing miniature, and I think that the sculpting choices really reflect that. So there's a good wedding of I guess world building and backstory into this character. I guess Imperial Nobles are really a dime a dozen in the Warhammer world. At a time when everybody's having lots of kids to offset your horrendous infant mortality rate. If this is anything like real life, or if this had any kind of parallels with real life, I'm sure infant mortality in the Warhammer world was probably not amazing. I guess it's really not helped also by the fact that you've got like marauding orc and goblin tribes, as well as your beastmen running around stealing your babies and running off into the woods. That was a thing. So yeah, I guess nobles can be counted on to have multiple illegitimate children. Just to keep the numbers high. No other reason. Not like they couldn't keep themselves, chaste or anything. So it was really quite likely that you would get, some plenty of dashing lordlings running around, quite eager to prove themselves, but not quite willing to submit themselves to a military commission, which, if the law tells us anything, is pretty restrictive and pretty dangerous at the same time, simply because wherever the armies of the Empire march, they tend to march also the witch hunters of Sigmar, as well as either Aurican priests or Sigmarite priests, and that makes life a lot less fun if you're a hedonistic young noble looking for, wild oats to sow. He's definitely got that air about him of somebody with a devil may care attitude. And what I do like about this guy's rules is that they do encourage you to play in such a way as well. There are a lot of instances where this model will be encouraged to essentially trade in all of his attacks for one super thing. His apex move, of course, his ultimate move, which you are going to get a lot of stick for if you use this guy with any regularity, is to essentially trade all of his attacks for one decapitating strike, which will allow him to essentially kill anything in the game, up to and including greater demons, if only he can get that one attack to go through. It's the kind of thing that, it requires a certain amount of bravery and bravado to pull off. And the vast majority of the time is going to mess up. It's going to miss, it's going to do nothing. But this guy's going to try anyway. I'm going to fix that later. Not to worry. So just a little bit more green around the edges of his lapel. And once this is ready, I think I'm gonna give this some time to dry off, because there is a lot of paint going on the back that I don't necessarily want to take off the surface, but I think I will redistribute gently, like so. Yeah. Cool. This is the kind of surface where you definitely need to come in and do another coat. Oh, right. So there's a little area around between his legs as well. Curiously, this part of his cape doesn't have a trim on it, so that's just a little bit strange. It's missing in the official artwork as well, or rather, it's missing in the officially painted version as well. I think it's just painted on the yellow line, so I might come back and do that later on. But to be honest, it's the kind of thing that if you weren't like anally retentive like me, and always trying to find on your miniatures, you might not actually notice. Nah, and there's nobody who's painting like old school miniatures like this who isn't at least partially anally retentive. We all know that. Cool. So a little bit of off whites. This is Vallejo Silver Grey, which I am applying to clean up some of the red areas that have spilled over onto his gloves, because his gloves are also going to be bright yellow. And gloriously bright yellow they are going to be as well. Not at all workman-like or like Bob the Builder, but a kind of really, vibrant and glorious yellow. Okay, I'm going to dry him off now, and I will be back in a bit. Cheers. We return to the Imperial Noble after a nice dose of hair dryer blasting. So let's see what we've got to work with here. it's mostly in the right place, our colors. They just need a little bit of cleanup and manual shading with the same colors. So I'm coming back in with Orc Flesh over his green cloak again. This time I'm applying it very carefully only to the recesses that I want to be nice and dark, insofar as the very simple curves on his cloak, the sort of wavy undulating motion, which I believe it looks like something a matador would wield, right? He's got that whole come at me bro kind of attitude. Works really well with this sort of Spanish matador style piece of garment, and that really works overall. I note that those also have very bright trims, all the better to enrage some poor beast with. And this goes right over his one shoulder, so kind of lots of attitude, lots of energy. Love it. So I'm coming back in with this green to essentially clean up the coat that we put on earlier, the coat, and make sure that we have a less blotchy finish. It's okay if it ends up very, very dark because, to be perfectly honest, the artwork was also very, very dark. In fact, it's just the very tips of this theatrical, sort of theatrically folded garment that kind of has anything resembling a highlight on it. So that's fine with me. Keep it nice and dark and just really a nice frame for that red clothing to sort of stand out and catch the eye. So I'm still moving along, adding this to every one of the folds. But what I've done is I'm now holding the miniature horizontally, so that it makes it easier for me to reach, and that should make things move along much quicker now. So yeah, the Imperial Noble, I think, really sort of created that essence of a character who kind of laughed in the face of death, and he was always fun to roleplay. A little bit of flamboyance, which was kind of missing, to be honest, in the original party members. Really helped a little bit. I think the wizard would be capable of just the spontaneous odd cackle, something about playing with dark forces that makes you a little bit insane. And the elf certainly, despite being quite proficient in combat, he was always more of a Legolas than a jokester. So this guy, with his crazy attitude in the face of the most vicious creatures in the Warhammer world, and I would argue that the Warhammer versions, the Warhammer Quest 95 versions, of most of these creatures was more terrifying than anything you would encounter in your average game of Warhammer Fantasy. Yeah, the fact that this guy had such a upbeat attitude always added a smile to our faces, and he was always a lot of fun to play, even if he wasn't the most effective person in the room. When he was working, he was stabbing away at 1,000 feet per minute per second, and just making huge piles of dead bodies, weak dead bodies. Unfortunately, every time there was something like a minotaur, he would struggle to hurt it, but he would sort of invite the kind of role play that really brought a smile to our faces, and that was kind of great. So green looking good, I think. We'll need to come in with a little bit more touch-ups. Just the nature of working with this color sometimes. It does get a bit blotchy if we're not too careful, and then we'll probably just detail the edge with a bit of a highlight a little bit later on. I'm going to try to reach the bit between his legs very carefully so as to not get any of this dark green on his trousers. That would be a bit of a disaster. How would he show his face in town again? And I think the prevailing joke that my friend used to make about this guy was he painted him red because then the blood wouldn't show. It's yeah. I mean, there's a bit of Lord Fleshheart in here as well, right? Kind of awesome. I'm going to jump in with some Fyreslayer flesh to do up his boots. His boots are pretty impressive, pretty huge, and I think Fyreslayer flesh does a really good job of creating a leather tone that's not too dark. not too kind of saturated and lacking in detail. We'll probably do more than one coat because I think the first coat tends to define the basic colors, but it tends to lack depth. The second coat will come in and deepen the shadows just as we intend, and tends to make things look a lot better as well. So let's drop that in around his boots. He's got wonderfully flared boots, so these are clearly riding boots of some description. Very, very chunky, very, very flamboyant. Quite an amazing looking pair of boots, I have to admit. And again, another reference to Ramirez from Highlander, right? Because his boots were epic as well. And so too is this guy's boots. Cool. So just running a little bit more Fire Slayer flesh around the margins. He does have a really prominent buckle, and that we will pick out in another color later, because this guy is nothing if not well dressed and looking great. Right. So a little bit more around his feet, and we should be good to move on to the next color after a little bit of drying time. We're going to jump in to detail his face now. It's high time we did something about his waxy white face. And this is just Guilliman Flesh plus Seraphim Sepia. And as you can see, the face is really quite well sculpted. You know, the paints that you put onto his face settle very naturally and really illuminate that kind of disdainful smirk that he's got going on. So this guy, I am very, very sure, found his way into a great many Empire armies simply because he was such an interesting model to include, you know, this really disdainful kind of character. I certainly saw him in like many a Warhammer battle, and he looked absolutely stunning, standing out from the front rank of a regiment, surrounded by identically equipped models. And this guy was just, you know, the fact that he got a lookout sir at all is has got to be fairly remarkable because of how, you know, outstandingly he is dressed. But there you go. I'm gonna drop a little bit of more Iyanden yellow onto that cloak and put them onto his gloves, his very prominent gloves. So this was previously cleaned up with a bit of silver grey, and we want to try to make sure that it doesn't pull too badly where it's not wanted. To the other hand, and you see what I mean about this being an incredibly well calibrated color scheme, right? Because just the addition of the yellow really sort of gets your eyes onto the most important part of the model, which is the business end that he uses to attack his opponents with. So it's on his hands because this is a character, well, with a character that's as free and as liberal and, you know, as much of an independent, hardhead and free-spirited character as he is. You never want to really draw the attention too much to the weapon necessarily, but to his hands, because that's a part of him with which he enacts his agency as a character. So this guy is all about, you know, it's all in his body, basically, and the part of his body that's most connected with his skill set are his hands. And in that sense, you draw the eye there because that makes him directly responsible for all of the carnage that he inflicts upon the enemy, if indeed he manages to hit his opponent and not just roll a 1 every single turn, which tended to happen, unfortunately. But despite that, he would just laugh it off and basically let the dwarf clean up. Because that's just how he does things. The dwarf is a bit of a pleb anyway, so do my bidding. Yeah, you have to sort of imagine that voice with this guy, right? He's got a bit of he's got a little bit of random from the IT crowd in him. just the perfect sort of look. Also, if you're a fan of what we do in the darkness. But yeah, random basically. Okay, so let's jump on to detailing his hair. So just a little bit of black, cut down slightly to ensure that some semblance of highlight shows through his lustrous locks. Again, perfectly okay if this gets onto the cape, because to be honest, that just adds that kind of outline, reinforces the margin between hair and clothing, and I think that looks perfectly good. Top of his head mustn't have any bald spots. And then his mustache and goatee, which I assure you are sculpted on there. So there we go. And then his little chin squig. Cool. Looking decent. He also has this strange little extra section under his knee. And I'm going to try to make sure that that margin is nice and clean. Likewise on this side. So he's got under boots that he's wearing under these riding boots, which is kind of nice. And then I'm going to go in and... did I get all of that correct? Sometimes with this model it's a little bit hard to tell because he is very, very fine. All of these little slashes are to be black, which is strange. So these confused me no end when I was younger, because I couldn't quite work out why these slashes were black, whereas the ones on his trousers were essentially yellow. So it is a little bit of a weird one, but I suppose it is what it is. I am following the official artwork, which I believe was by Mark Bedford. Might be wrong about that. Don't quote me. But yeah, it's got a bit of a cross on his chest. Again, adding to that clearly Spanish sort of look. Really is a handsome boy. And then we need to go over his buckles as well. There's a surprising amount of black on this model actually. All things considered, even though when you look at him from afar, you might basically struggle to pick out any actual black on the miniature. But there is quite a bit of black going on. All in subtle spots, nothing too huge and defining, but very noticeable when you kind of hold him at arm's length, or if you see him on the tabletop, because everything looks sharp and defined because they're usually edged in black. So that's just one way that they use to make the model look as defined and as sharp and as readable as possible. Those bits over there need to be touched up with red instead of black, because I think that's what those areas should be. And yeah, it's a bit of a slash over here, and a little bit over there. I think that looks alright. I got to do the reverse side as well. To be honest, I was almost going to go, yay, I'm done with this horrible slashed Imperial clothing. Now look guys, if you've never painted an Imperial soldier with all this slash Renaissance jazzy clothing, it is the worst. But once you're done with it, you can breathe a sigh of relief, because to be perfectly honest, now that we have contrast paint, it's a lot less of a pain than it used to be. It used to be pretty bad, let me tell you. It used to be really, really time consuming to pick out every single one of these tiny little areas and then do individual shades and highlights. Bad news bears. Absolute nightmare to do. Now with contrast paint, most of the work is done with just one coat, and that helps a lot. But every now and then, it still reminds you of how hard it was to do it back in the day. So kudos to everyone who did it the old way, the right way. Today we're just gonna like cheap our way through it. I think I want to do the underside of his cloak in black as well. I don't quite like the way it looks like as solid yellow. But as a just an artifact of the casting process, many models actually did have undersides like this that looked kind of odd if you kind of left them like in the bright color that they were painted in, but which looked, I believe, a lot better hidden anyway when done up in black. Cool. So we're going to move on to adding a little bit of the orc flesh to the handles of his weapons. So that includes his little sidearm dagger over here. It's the reverse. What's nice about it is when you get the green over the red, it just looks black, and that's kind of ideal. We can also grab a little bit for the inside of his hand where he's clutching the hilt. His weapon. And then we want to just jump in and start laying in all of the silver, of which there is a surprising amount as well. Truly a model with many surprises. So yeah, when it comes to adding the Imperial Noble to your party, it's always a bit of a hard one because the natural choice is to replace the Barbarian. But the Barbarian does actually get pretty like hard later on in the fight because the barbarian can wear a lot of armor, right? And that makes him a little bit tougher, a little bit more resilient in the fight. And there is a point in the mid battle levels where the lack of armor that an Imperial Noble can wear really starts to count against him because he's nowhere near as tough as a barbarian at a similar level. And that's basically where he starts to go down a lot. And it's pretty unfortunate because it doesn't really matter how much damage you can inflict if you're not even surviving to actually swing your weapon. And I don't think he was doing damage reliably enough for him to basically dispatch his opponents before they hit him, which is another problem. There are, in particular, a lot of enemies in the game that have the ambush special rule, which had a tendency to kind of deck the Imperial Noble and take him off his feet before he even got to swing his rapier, which is a bit unfortunate. But such is the life of a glass cannon build in a game where there is very often very little warning before enemies get to attack. Using him to replace the elf was also a bit of a challenge because the elf had his healing potion, which was a very big part of his clutch ability to restore, a player to essentially full health. At least for pick up and play sort of games, he was a little bit of a hard sell as well. So the Imperial Noble really was quite difficult to use. He wasn't the most reliable damage dealer, and he certainly couldn't really take a hit. At least until later on in the game. He did come with a sizable or decent amount of hit points, so he did have quite a few wounds to lose before he was actually taken out. But when you're up against things like Minotaurs and so on, those wounds go away real fast. And unfortunately, the Imperial Noble really struggles to weather that initial storm. And weather the storm he would need to do basically until he got to the stage where he started to, have a bit more evasive abilities, like the ability to sort of evade blows and so on, and maybe have a couple of ablative pieces of equipment because he couldn't use armor, which is the big problem, right? Because Once a character could wear armor, it essentially meant that he could soak a certain amount of attacks every single time. Dodge tanking was always less of an ideal choice because dodge tanking only comes into play when you roll the requisite number to dodge tank, whereas armor always worked no matter how hard you were hit. Generally speaking, unless the blow ignored armor or something obnoxious like that, generally speaking, your armor would come into play every single time you were hit. In addition, there was usually a limit on dodge tanking, right? Insofar as you couldn't always use it against every single incoming attack. Many weapons, many pieces of war gear, for example, armor, conferred immunity to a single hit, but if you were ever to roll a 1, you would lose that item. So that was a fairly common setup. And that would mean that you would lose your ability to sort of dodge tank beyond that first hit that you took if you rolled a 1. Likewise, many dodge abilities can only be used once in a turn. So dodge tanking was always less good, frankly, than just straight up armor. And the Imperial Noble was short on armor because his love of fabulous silks as well as fashionable clothing means that he would never lower himself to wear armor like that, which is a bigger problem than it sounds because this guy then suddenly uses up a lot of your healing, because he's liable to be in the front rank where he can do damage, but where he's also himself the target of a lot of damage, and that makes him a little bit hard to use efficiently, which is a bit of a shame because this guy is such a cool model, such a cool different attitude, and he was a lot of fun to see on the battlefield, even if he wasn't in a dungeon, even if he wasn't the most effective hero. Cool. I am going to come in with a bit of ice yellow to clean up these areas because it's beginning to bother me the way they look. By which I mean that they've been bothering me this whole time, which I'm sure they've been bothering you as well. Sometimes painting is about delayed gratification, letting us get to the highlight stage before we eliminate telling problems with the paint job, because we are trying to wait till we get everything else in that color also ready for the highlight. Tiny micro decisions that go through my brain as I paint miniatures. Endlessly entertaining, I must say. Cool. On to the gloves. So I will definitely be coming back in to apply a little bit more Iyanden yellow just to make sure that the gloves look properly shaded, and also to trim back some of these highlights which are admittedly a little bit harsh. By now you should be a master of painting the 4 little knuckle bones on the back of your model's hands. It's required learning to paint most old hammer miniatures because so many of these miniatures, or not just old hammer miniatures, I guess like older miniatures, so many of them tend to have this on the back of their hands. In fact, I imagine it's only like models like Stormcast and Space Marines that do away with it entirely because they've got honking big gauntlets. Honestly, I think that may be part of why they actually are sculpted that way, because your average casual gamer probably doesn't want to have to deal with details like that for admittedly very little actual effect. Because it's just a functional detail, it's not anything that adds any personality to the piece. So maybe that's why so many of the more popular or models where Games Workshop is really trying to sell the miniature, maybe that's why so many of them feature covered back of the hands. Back, well, you know what I mean. Like the back have their back of their hands essentially covered, so that you don't need to fuss around. Something slipped out. Yeah, cool. It's looking weirdly like Keanu Reeves now. But that's okay. Cool. So it's time, I think, to let the silver dry fully. But maybe just a little bit more leather around these areas. The butt of his pistol can also be vaguely leather colored. Not much difference between that and the belt, to be perfectly honest. And it's okay if we overlap a little bit onto the red, because Fyreslayer's flesh makes almost no impact on red. And then a little bit of a second coat of Fyreslayer flesh to re-establish the intensity that we want on the boots. It's the wrong color. To make sure that we don't leave any like white areas exposed, or off-white areas. Places which are essentially just my undercoat spray of Pylox grey white. At this point, I think I've used so many cans of Pylox grey white that I might as well invest in the company. But if you are in Singapore and you have access to Pylox grey white, I heartily recommend that you try it as a base over which you can apply contrast paints, because I think it does a wonderful job. Not just saying that, and absolutely not sponsored by Pylox. Although Pylox, call me, man. If you need to expand your user base, let me know. We can talk, we can work something out. Cool. So these bits have been bothering me for a while, so it's good. Feels good to cover them up. And we're gonna grab a bit more yellow, ice yellow that is, to make sure that this glove doesn't have any offending red patches on them, before coming in with the Iyanden yellow to clean up. Sorry, a bit of a funny angle, guys. I hope you not begrudge me that. And yeah, the slits. These slits are very fine. Very fine. I really don't want to be going back and forth. So one thing that I sometimes do is I brush off on my thumb, like so, to essentially turn the paintbrush into a chisel-like shape. All the better to sort of sneak a small amount of paint into the recess like that. And unbelievably, I've actually done what I said I would do. So all too often I go watch these guys and then I fucking screw it up like instantly. But not today. Not today. Today we are doing okay. That's good. So I immediately make a mistake over here. I have to clean it up with a bit more red. Okay, we are moving along at a fair pace, at a fair clip, as they say. So let's drop a little bit of, a little bit more Fyreslayer flesh on the butt of his pistol. That's looking a little bit too light to convince anyone that that's made of wood. So a little bit more there. And yes, I forgot to put it onto... I have no idea what this part of the rifle is called. Of a gun or a rifle is called. It's the stock, I suppose. But it's the bit that basically holds the barrel. The grip, I suppose. Because that's basically where you would hold on to the rifle or the gun. I don't know, something like that. A little bit more orc flesh to clean up. Make sure everything's nice and sharp. And because this boy is anything if not sharp, he's the sharpest Warhammer hero, Warhammer Quest hero at least. What about you guys? Do you guys get a chance to play with the Imperial Noble? Are you a fan? Um, I feel like the people who like the Imperial Noble are very dedicated to playing as the Imperial Noble. And are absolute fans, mostly because of the RPG potential, the role playing potential for a character like him, because he's so flamboyant and so entertaining. Like the stories just tell themselves. But for people who are more sort of results driven, read power gamers, I think honestly it's a little bit hard to get behind the Imperial Noble. And I include myself in that measure because I played as an Imperial Noble a couple of times. And I found that unless I was able to roll that required skill, which is I think an 8 on a d6, on 2d6 when he levels up, to be able to add his strength to his blows, this chap was hard work to keep alive. It was just difficult, frankly. I am now mixing a little bit of ice yellow into Vallejo clear orange and a little bit of vermilion to create a fairly neutral highlight. And we're going to drop this onto his chest plate. I do believe this is a chest plate, but kind of covered in velvet. It's very, very suiting, or it suits him perfectly. Suiting. It suits him, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I've seen people paint this model with, like a silver breastplate, but something about that just adds a lot of like practicality to his outfit and doesn't make him look quite as good. So I respect the original choice by the heavy metal team essentially to paint this chap with a red breastplate to make it look like a covered breastplate. This guy would never do anything as vulgar as travel in the open with visible armor. Not very dashing, is it? If you're too obsessed with self-preservation, Hero Noble needs none of that. It just needs altogether way too much self-confidence. So this mix of orange, Vallejo clear orange, vermilion, and ice yellow really just gives us options to sort of tweak their relative strength within the mix, the ratios, in order to give us a full range of colors to play with. So add a little bit more ice yellow and you have an altogether more fleshy and desaturated highlight. If you want a more intense orange, as we do today, make sure that you have enough of that clear orange, Vallejo clear orange, which is a great color. Really enjoy using it because of its strong coverage, as well as its just vibrant nature, and red if it all happens to be a little bit too strong. Cool. So we are bumping up the highlight now to include more ice yellow, which is the reason why you see it come on so strong now. And because we've kept enough orange, this still reads as a kind of a fiery orange color. But now there is a real intensity to it. And the previous layers that we apply are not wasted, of course. They're just there to give a really good foundation for this color to work on. And for this color, we don't need to apply a great deal of it. Just a little bit here and there, where needed to catch the eye as needed. And also on his codpiece, because, well, of course you have to, right? Like, it would be rude not to. With a model like this, where virility is basically built into his stat line, with his ability to stab and stab over and over again, you kind of have to get his codpiece that is nice and prominent. It's his way of coping, I believe, with endless minotaurs and all of the horrible things that will kill you in the dark, were it not for your overweening self-confidence. This is just the kind of guy who would face that down, hand on his hip, and essentially mansplain his way to victory. And I am here for it. The only problem is when I tried to do it, it did not work and I got eaten by minotaurs. But that's just life, isn't it? Sometimes life gives you minotaurs and you have to pray for those sixes. Sometimes you get them, sometimes you get eaten. But we learn from our mistakes and we switch to playing a witch hunter. The character that I actually play, yeah, that's something that I should bring up. The character that I play the most actually is a witch hunter. I love the witch hunter. To anybody who basically like lives in fear of bad die rolls, like the witch hunter is like balm to a tortured soul. You have so much ability to screw around with the dice with a witch hunter that it really soothes your mind. There is more like resource play, basically, resource management play, because you've got the faith stat that can be spent to alter die rolls. It's okay, I'll save all of this for the Witch Hunter video that I'm sure is inevitably coming at some point. But yeah, when I was done with the Imperial Noble, I inevitably defaulted to my favorite Witch Hunter. And Witch Hunter's still alive today, just saying. This chap, 6 foot under, unfortunately. But today we immortalize him with this glorious miniature. So we can't say we tried. And the truth is, once you paint this miniature, you very much want to try to run him again and see if he can roll that much needed skill, allowing him to add his strength to his rapier strikes, and then all is good in the world. At least until he meets his first Griffin. Cool. Lots of colors going on. Let's go straight to some Nuln Oil to shade down his rapier. So we're going to try to concentrate more of the color at the base and keep the main part of his blade nice and shiny, and also to make sure that it fills all the that valley between the surface of the rapier and the adjacent materials that it's sitting next to. So for example, like his cape, as well as his lovely doublet. That's what it is. It's the word I wanted to use. And I think after this I might have to grab the hairdryer because there is an awful lot of ground to cover with Nuln Oil. And I do actually want to build it up quite strongly in some areas to give the weapons a bit of a direction. A little bit of non-oil also would not go amiss to defining some of these areas a little bit deeper. On the original model, I have to say that the shading is really intense in places because there is a lot of red on red with this model. So I think they made clever use of areas where it made sense to apply a little bit of non-oil or some other shading color to intensify the contrast between spaces. And yeah, kudos to them for making that decision because I think the model looks a lot better for it. To be honest, a lot of early miniatures had this thing that people used to do called black lining. Black lining was the act of basically taking black paint and applying very thin outlines to help differentiate colors. Um, it's kind of fallen out of favor today, but if you look at a lot of the earlier like character models, you'll find that occasionally you will run into one from this era or thereabouts that has really intense shading, like to the point of being black, and that's basically black lining in use. It was popular with certain painters, but less so with, say, Mike McVeigh, who did use it every now and then, but didn't use it as much. Some of the heavy metal painters at this point were on rotation essentially, or else they were painted by people who were kind of itinerant members of the heavy metal team. So what I found is that some miniatures are painted very distinctly indeed from others, very different styles, which was kind of nice because you could always sort of gravitate towards the ones that you liked. Yeah, but for the most part, within a range, they would try to keep the style the same, just so that it would be less jarring for the viewer. And I kind of appreciated that. But every now and then, you would sort of see a model that sort of stood out as being painted rather differently. And the only real explanation is, yeah, it's done by somebody else. So a little bit more AK like flesh, which is my highlight of choice, to do the final details on his face, to make sure that his high cheekbones and his noble forehead stand out, as well as his gout-ridden cheeks. Perfect. So I'm gonna grab the hairdryer because he is plenty wet, and I'll get back to you soon. We are back! I'm a big fan of Matt Berry, as you can tell, unfortunately for your ears. So we're coming in with the gold, and there's something really joyous, of course, about adding the gold wash, which is, in my case, it's Nazdreg yellow plus Seraphim Sepia. Something really joyous about applying the gold wash over the silver that I've painted on to bits of his rapier as a setup for this stage. And yeah, over his glorious little dagger as well. I'm going to do it almost entirely in gold because, man, that's an ostentatious dagger. But you know what? It suits him just fine. It's like a Cinque Dias. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Sorry if I butchered that. That's a Spanish dagger. It means five. Like the blade is 5 fingers wide. Cinque Dias, something like that. I promise you that's the last time I'll try to mangle it. Cool. Yeah. So lots of gold to cover. Hilt of his basket hilted rapier. Very nice looking indeed. It's interesting that there weren't that many basket hilted weapons in the Warhammer setting. So this is quite a unique looking weapon. Cool. Now we're going to move on to apply a little bit more to his cross, his Imperial cross, then his dagger, which is so encrusted with filigree that it might as well all be gold. And be done. I think that's it. Not that much gold after all, but enough gold where it counts to be visually appealing is how I would define that. Yeah. Okay, so I think he's looking pretty good. We're gonna grab a little bit of silver gray, I mean, and we're gonna mix in a little bit of orc flesh to create a highlight to edge all of these areas and to clean up a little bit of the sort of jagginess that's going on over here. Not sure what's going on there, but somehow the contrast orc flesh didn't dry perfectly smooth. This one I think will emphasize the top bit, kind of like that. I'm running the brush just up and down, smoothing out the places where our orc flesh has pulled away from the surface to create the faux highlights. This is what contrast paint does. Very well indeed, which is to set up these lighter areas for us to then come in with a highlight to really intensify and to sharpen. And that's, I mean, honestly, like if your eyesight is deteriorating anything like mine, this is a godsend. It's such a good way to make painting, picking out these areas so much easier, because even the act of applying contrast paint, even if it's not the final look that you wish to achieve, is really excellent for letting you know which bits require highlighting and for picking out details and just making the model overall look easier to read even at the painting stage. So it just makes your life a lot easier if your eyesight is kind of going down the tubes, as is the case for mine. Nothing out of the ordinary, don't worry. It's just old eyes. Cool. A little bit more white, or off-white rather, and we can really start to sharpen this outfit. Literally sharpen the highlights so that he looks sharp, as well as is sharp with his rapier, so long as he doesn't miss. I talk a lot about missing with the Imperial Noble, because that's kind of really the bane of this chap. Weapon skill is not in short supply. This guy has a fairly decent weapon skill, but this guy feels rolling ones a lot more than other players do. And because when he rolls a 1, that's basically the end of his attack run, unfortunately. If he has 1s, if he rolls anything other than a 1, he can theoretically go on fighting forever, which is hilarious, because he can absolutely ventilate an enemy given a chance. But he needs to do so many times in rapid succession if he wants to stand any hope of damaging something relatively tough like a Minotaur. And that's usually where most parties began to struggle. Minotaurs are far and away like the bane of early level runs, because for some bizarre reason the designers felt like they wanted to put Minotaurs like multiple wound, like monstrous infantry into a game with no more than 4 like level 1 party members. To put it in context, your average Minotaur does more damage, has more wounds, and is quite capable of, in some cases, one-shotting a hero. And yet, these guys will come in up to 3 at a go. There was a card that basically brought onto the board D3 Minotaurs, and D3 is too much. Like, I don't think the game has quite gotten. I mean, my party is now well into its level 6 and level 7. I don't think it ever got quite as hard as it did during that initial few runs, just out of the box, because of those darn Minotaurs. And they made an absolute mess of us over and over again. There were like countless runs where we just called it because we ran into D3 Minotaurs. And there was very little chance of us fighting our way out of that. Not when we had a wizard who was not the most capable fighter with low weapon skill. Not when we had an elf who kind of basically had only strength 3 to work with. And not when we had a barbarian who was only weapon skill 3 and therefore outskilled by a minotaur. So bad news bears all around, man, honestly. Minotaurs are. Woof! Minotaurs scared the crap out of us. Okay, so we are very nearly done. I think all I really want to do at this stage is to add a bit of a highlight to the Fireslayer flesh boots, because they are looking a little bit on the dark side, literally just around the tip here. And at the tip of his boot, I think would put us in a good place. And we can carry on to the next adventure. Matt Berry, man. Such a legend. He is, in my opinion at least, the Brian Blessed of our era. This generation's Brian Blessed. But yeah. Okay, I think that's it. I think he looks pretty good, and I hope you agree as well. Thank you for joining me. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you enjoyed watching me paint this chap. I think he looks very handsome. I hope you agree. And I'll see you on the tabletop. Cheers. Bye-bye.